Morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Heather Manus, founder of the Cannabis Nurses Network, and I'm absolutely delighted that you've chosen to spend part of your Saturday with us. Today's event is called Connected, and that title couldn't be more fitting. As our speakers prepared their talks over the past several weeks, something beautiful happened. Without even planning it, many of them kept returning to the same idea, connection. Connection to ourselves, connection to our patients, connection to science, connection to purpose, connection to one another. Each speaker has a unique story and perspective, yet together they create a much larger narrative that healing has always been about relationships. So today, we invite you to listen with curiosity, to reflect with an open heart, and perhaps discover a new connection within yourself. So let's begin. I remember caring for my very first cannabis patient. At the time, I was working as a home health nurse in New Mexico. Like every other day, I went to the office, I gathered my patient assignments and began reviewing the charts for the day. As I opened one chart, something immediately caught my attention. At the top of the medication record was a single word, written in all capital letters, cannabis. I paused. As a nurse, I had never seen cannabis listed as a medication before. I wasn't sure what to think. I was curious. I had questions. And honestly, I wasn't entirely sure what I was walking into. That day, I met a patient. I'll call him Kevin. Kevin was one of the first legal medical cannabis patients in New Mexico. Patient number 5, to be exact. As I completed my nursing assessment, I learned that his caregiver cultivated his medicine and prepared many different formulations to help with different symptoms. There were tinctures, edibles, topicals, and of course, flower. What began as a routine nursing visit became something much more meaningful. I wasn't simply learning about a plant. I was learning about a person, his story, his suffering, his hope, his healing. And over the next 20 years, that lesson would repeat itself thousands of times. People often ask me how I became an expert in cannabis nursing. The truth is, everything I know about cannabis medicine, I learned from the plant herself and from the people she has helped to heal. Patient by patient, story by story, connection by connection. And what I discovered along the way changed my nursing practice, as well as my understanding of healing itself. My name is Nurse Heather, a name that was given to me by my patients. And for the first 10 years of my journey, I focused primarily on patients and industry development. I helped to build programs, I developed products, created educational resources, and advocated for ethical practices. Like many pioneers entering a new field, I believed we were building something important and extraordinary. And in fact, we were. But then something shifted. Over the last 10 years, my focus became nurses, educating nurses, mentoring nurses, supporting nurses, empowering nurses to find confidence in a field that is often misunderstood and frequently criticized. And through that work, I began noticing a pattern. The most meaningful transformations weren't happening because somebody learned a new fact. They weren't happening because somebody memorized a cannabinoid pathway or understood a policy change. The transformations happened when people felt connected, when patients felt seen, when nurses felt supported, when communities felt understood, when someone finally realized that they weren't alone. And that's when I began asking a different question. What if healing is not primarily about fixing? What if healing is about reconnecting? You see, modern healthcare is incredibly good at managing disease, but many people today are suffering from something that doesn't always appear in a medical chart: disconnection. Disconnection from themselves, from each other, disconnection from nature, from purpose, from meaning. And as nurses, we encounter this every day. We see it in patients who feel invisible, in families carrying grief, in healthcare professionals experiencing burnout, in communities searching for belonging. The more I studied the endocannabinoid system, the more fascinating this became, because the endocannabinoid system is fundamentally a system of communication, a system of connection, a system that helps maintain balance throughout the body. Every major physiological system is influenced by it. The nervous system, the immune system, the digestive system, the endocrine system, the cardiovascular system. It's constantly communicating, constantly adapting, constantly helping the body find equilibrium. In many ways, the endocannabinoid system reminds us of a profound truth. Life thrives through connection, not isolation, connection. And perhaps the lesson extends far beyond biology, because healthy individuals create healthy relationships, and healthy relationships create healthy communities, and healthy communities create healthy societies. And we all know healthy societies create a healthier world. Connection isn't just something we need emotionally. It's fundamental to who we are. As nurses, we are uniquely positioned to help restore those connections, not because we have all the answers, we don't, but because we are present. We listen, we witness, we care, and caring matters. In a world increasingly driven by technology, algorithms, and efficiency, human connection may become one of the most valuable forms of medicine we have left. The future of healthcare will certainly include advances in science. It will include innovation and new discoveries. But I hope it will also include something equally as important: more compassion, more presence, more humanity, and dare I say, more love. Because after 20 years, I've learned something that surprised me. People rarely remember every piece of information that you teach them. They don't remember every policy we advocated for. They certainly don't remember every credential that we earned. But like Maya Angelou says, they remember how we made them feel. They remember whether they felt safe, whether they felt valued, whether they felt heard, whether they felt loved. And when I reflect on my career, I realized something. I thought I was helping to build an industry, but I was really building connections. Connections between nurses and patients. Connections between science and compassion. Connections between people and plants. Connections between individuals and their own capacity to heal. And perhaps that's what my first patient, Kevin, was teaching me all those years ago. Not simply how cannabis works, but how healing works. Healing begins when people feel connected to themselves, connected to others, connected to hope, to possibility, to love. So when people ask me today what legacy I hope to leave behind, my answer is simple. I don't hope to be remembered for founding organizations or building programs or pioneering a specialty. Those things matter, but they're not the legacy. The legacy is the people, the lives touched, the nurses empowered, the patients supported, the communities strengthened, the love shared. Because in the end, the greatest medicine we leave behind is not what we accomplish. It's how much we cared and how deeply we loved. And that is the legacy that we leave. Thank you. I hope that this first presentation has reminded you that those patient encounters are so important and that they hold potential to change both lives, both that of the patient as well as us as the caregivers and nurses. Our next speaker continues this theme by exploring another kind of connection, the power of finding and using our voice. Your voice dismantles stigma. Connection begins with conversation. And every time a nurse speaks truth, educates a colleague, comforts a patient, or advocates for change, stigma begins to lose its power. Please welcome Marilyn Pierce.
I thank you, Heather, for leading us on this journey, for being a leader in the cannabis nursing space and in cannabis in general. Thank you and welcome to all my colleagues here and to our guests. Your voice dismantles stigma, nurses shifting healthcare culture, and cannabis law. So we all have a story about how we learned about medical cannabis. I enjoyed Heather's story. Mine is a little bit different and a little bit later in life. It was 2018 and I was co-hosting and executive producing a radio show, a live radio show on the internet. And we had an interviewee who was a physician, and he was known for going to the Capitol and he was advocating to expand the list of reasons why you can be a medical cannabis patient. And so I knew about cannabis. I had smoked it when I was 18 or so. I knew what that was all about. I knew it was all about just getting high, and I saw them out there before the interview preparing. And I get it. I got what they were up to. But after I heard his story, it changed my life. Hi, my name is Marilyn Pierce, and I am known as the Cannabis Nurse Connector because I answer questions that you can't ask your pastor, your family member, your doctor sometimes, or your family about medical cannabis. And stigma is one of the reasons why we become disconnected with the truth. It's one of the most prohibitive reasons that we can't talk openly about medical cannabis, about this topic. And the definition of stigma is, from Merriam-Webster, a negative, unfair belief that society or people have. And a belief is something that you've said over and over in your head so many times you believe that it's true. May or may not be. Goffman studied stigma, and he said it's a part of yourself that's socially devalued. It becomes morally offensive what you're doing. So to finish the story about the physician, he was a kind man, a kind physician. He had his own practice. He was in palliative care, hospice. He took care of chronic pain patients. He prescribed opioids for people and treated all the side effects of that. And one day he was an athlete and he was playing basketball and he went headfirst into the chest of another teammate and felt and heard something. And it turns out he broke his neck. He fractured his cervical spine. 2 surgeries, and 2 years later, this physician had become one of his own patients. He was dependent on opioids. He was treating himself for the side effects of the opioids. He was terribly depressed. He was losing his business. He couldn't work. And he even said and disclosed that he considered suicide until he found medical cannabis. It changed his life and his story changed mine. So stigma, or disconnection from the truth about medical cannabis, is supported on 3 levels: our laws and our society, healthcare, which a lot of us have worked in or still work in, and the policies they have, and also our personal beliefs. So let's start with laws and society. Stigma shapes laws. Now, we know that federally, that's a bigger picture and things will change on June 29th or 30th or whenever they decide, and whatever's going to happen, we're not quite sure. But in the meantime, all of the states have made their own special laws around medical cannabis and around what we would call adult use cannabis as well. And I don't call it recreational because I do not believe that adults use cannabis recreationally, generally speaking. Most of them are treating themselves as they would anyone else, using tools to manage stress and control this very stressful and toxic environment we have. So each of the laws of the states are different, though the green states are adult use states. The blue states are you can only use medical cannabis. They have medical laws. And the orange ones are more restrictive, and the white ones have no laws about medical cannabis at all. It's absolutely not even addressed. And so and each state is very different in its own laws. The 23 states and 3 territories are adult use. I live in Georgia. We have medical cannabis. We are blue, so we have a medical cannabis program. But if I am not a medical cannabis patient with a card, and I have possession of any cannabis, then I can be arrested, convicted, and put in prison. So it still exists. The stigma and the fear still exist. But nurses, such as ourselves on this panel, are experts. And so we need to work to teach, first of all, our legislators. You'll find as a nurse that they think we're smart and they believe us, which is cool because we are, and we're respected as a profession. So we're thought of as the smartest person in the room. And so when you are called up to speak, take advantage of that. Be the nurse you are, because nurses can support changing law. Know who your representatives are, know their position on cannabis, watch how they vote, and learn how your state operates. Show up for committee meetings. I have to be honest, I took a class that taught me how my legislation works. I did not know, and I had to take the class twice. So learn and be a part of that opportunity to teach legislators. I wanted to tell another really quick story about teaching legislators. So I'm going to go back here. I was on a meeting with NORML, which is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, been around for decades. And there was a local chapter and there was a politician on, they were running for office. And so they came on and I looked this politician up, and she was a veteran. She had served in 2 armed forces. She had a PhD. She had been serving on veteran committees in our state. And she was a woman of integrity and knowledge, and I respected her. But when she began to speak to us, she had rhetoric and just all the lies that they're taught, all the propaganda that is spewed in legislation and in laws and in the arena of legislators. So I told her, because I looked her up, I said, thank you. First of all, thank you for serving our country. I have great respect and appreciation for all that you've done. Thank you for being a veteran. Thank you for serving on committees and representing veterans. And I know you're a woman of integrity and knowledge because you have a PhD. And I know that you would not come somewhere and want to represent yourself in a way other than integrity and respect. And so I'm going to tell you that some of the things that you have said are not exactly true. Can we talk about that and maybe get things straight, because I know you want to represent integrity and knowledge. And the rest of the meeting was all of us sharing together. So creating a safe space for people to be able to come outside of their beliefs and learn. That's what I did. And I wish that for all. And now we need to do it in healthcare, because we have all worked in healthcare, or we currently work in healthcare. And historically, the physicians that we work with came from medical schools that did not teach about medical cannabis. It just wasn't managed that way. They were taught that it was a Schedule I drug and there was no medical value. And a lot of them came through during the reefer madness era too. Now, nurses, you would think, would learn more, but in 2022, there was a study with nursing students, and they said that they felt completely unprepared to talk about medical cannabis to patients, that they learned most of their information from the news and then from their patients. So what happens, generally speaking, when people don't know and they're fearful of the consequences and the stigma, that it leads to silence, and silence leads to harm, where our patients don't know and where nothing is spoken of. So this doesn't need to be the case in nursing. I'm going to go over this really quickly, but in 2018, the National Council of State Board of Nursing didn't suggest, didn't just guide, didn't just put out there. They mandated that nurses know their state laws and regulations, the endocannabinoid system, pharmacology, safety, and that they approach their patients non-judgmentally in a collaborative way. That was the mandate in 2018. And then almost 3 years ago, to be 3 years in September, the American Nurses Association declared cannabis as a nursing specialty. This is a 5 million nurses that are representing us politically. This is our political arm, our strength. They determined that we need to develop evidence-based standards and that this was definitely a medicine that was that needed to be understood and was a specialty. So nursing in our profession provides permission and guidance and mandating us to speak about it. But stigma stops us. Stigma stops us from acting on that permission. You may worry about being the one that would be more likely to be drug tested, or we might lose our job or not be promoted or lose respect within our cultural healthcare environment. So there's a lot of fear, and stigma and fear and disconnection all go together. I'll tell a personal story when I get into the personal part of this. I was about 18 years old and I was in a car. I brought the car and my friend Debbie brought the weed. And we were in a parking lot and there was lots of smoke. And one day at this time when we were in the parking lot, all of a sudden there were 2 police cars that came up right next to us, pulled up right next to us on either side and got out. And we were pretty much busted. Now, one thing about in the late 1970s in my hometown, there were 2 places that were open 24 hours. That was one gas station and the Dunkin' Donuts, which gave free coffee and donuts to all the police officers all night long. And Debbie worked nights at Dunkin' Donuts. So when the police saw Debbie, they were like, "Oh, hey, Deb, how you doing? Yeah, y'all need to just kind of move along." And I was like, phew, got out of that one, but it left an indelible mark on me. Even more so, I was more afraid than ever of cannabis. I was more afraid to get busted. If that had happened, it would have changed the whole trajectory of my life. And I continue to have that fear. And I have to admit that even to this day, when I see a cannabis leaf, I have a subconscious kind of reaction of fear to seeing it. I have that stigma inside me, because stigma lives inside of all of us. The disconnection from the truth. It's a part of our history. It's something that we believe, even though we don't know why, or maybe we don't know why. It's a part of our patient's history, maybe something they experienced or their family or whatever was they've gone through in their history. It's a part of healthcare workers' history. There's a reason people aren't talking. They're afraid as well. And it's a part of our legislators' history. But being aware of this is the first step. It's step 1 in overcoming stigma. So we need to work to change stigma by being aware, anticipate that it's going to be present. And then after we do that, like for instance, what I did with the legislator, I looked her up and I supported her and I gave her a safe place. Then when she became relaxed and open, we were able to talk to her. And education is the second part. The more we know and learn, the better it will be. The more we will become connected. And then finally, we will be able to normalize speaking openly and honestly and connecting about this option, this beautiful plant option that may be an answer to many people's prayers. It's a domino effect. Every legislator you reach is a law that may shift, and every colleague that you educate is a voice that would multiply. Every patient conversation is an opportunity to move this forward. So speak for the laws that need to change, and speak for the colleague who's not been informed. Speak for the patients who are afraid to ask for good reason. And it's uncomfortable, and discomfort is is something that I have this in this little burst here. Growth is determined by the amount of discomfort you tolerate. So I encourage us all to grow. This is my call to action. You are not one nurse. You are not one person. You are the movement. You are the revolution. Staying silent is a choice, and that will lead to disconnection and perpetuation of stigma. So if you are all in the room with me, I have to get you all to do this with me. So I promise that I will speak as well. On together we speak and be the change that we all wish to see. I thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Marilyn. Once we find our voice, we begin to realize something remarkable, that we are part of a story much larger than ourselves, right? Our next speaker takes us back to where that story began. Sue Rosen will be talking about ancient roots. And connection isn't only between people, it's also across generations. Sue reminds us that today's movement stands upon centuries of wisdom carried by healers, caregivers, and courageous women who came before us. Please welcome Sue Rosen.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sue Rosen, and I am a cannabis nurse. And I'm here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ancient roots of cannabis, which are pretty interesting. They called it weed, and they called us witches. For thousands of years, women have been central to the history of cannabis. And we were primary medical healers, spiritual guides. We were political reformers and corporate innovators. And in ancient civilization, we held a vast knowledge of herbal medicine and used cannabis to help treat female-specific health issues. So this talk is going to be about women in cannabis. So let's take a look back in history. In 1550 BC, ancient Egypt had medical texts that outlined using hemp to alleviate vaginal inflammation and childbirth. Women. In the 5th century, the princess of Ukok, I think that's how you pronounce it, was discovered frozen and mummified, buried alongside a pouch of cannabis. And that's her right over there on the side. You can see that pouch of cannabis on top of the body. She was buried with her stash. Scientists determined she suffered from breast cancer and used cannabis to manage her pain. We also had goddesses, women, Sishat and Megu, who were depicted as the hemp goddesses of healing. Okay, let's jump to the 19th century now. Now, if you look over to, let's see, I guess it would be your right. That's Queen Victoria, and she was a part of the British monarch. And she used monthly prescriptions of cannabis tinctures to treat her monthly cramps. However, as prohibition took hold in the 20th century, our role was erased from history. And it may have been erased, but our advocacy never disappeared. Women, it only evolved, and we see that happening today with women's rights. Our rights have been shredded again, but that's okay. We'll get them back. Midwives have a long history of using cannabis in healing practice. As a botanical remedy in folk medicine, cannabis was used to help manage labor pains, childbirth discomfort, menstrual cramps, and in modern practice, a patient's history of cannabis use is a part of the screening process for midwives. While ancient midwifery included the plant, today's midwives caution patients against its use because of potential side effects. And I can say that here today, and I don't advise anyone else to do that. That's going to have a baby or what have you. I smoked weed when I was pregnant, and I did okay. Okay, so for the millennial traditional healers, herbalists, and midwives across the world, cannabis has been recognized as an antispasmodic and for its analgesic properties. Medical texts dating back as far as 2000 BC, midwives documented using cannabis mixed with honey, which I find that's really pretty interesting because honey has so many, benefits. It's an antibacterial, properties and what have you. And that stimulated contractions and eased difficult labor. During the Middle Ages, European midwives routinely incorporated cannabis into their botanical potions to help alleviate postpartum pain and cramping. Before Prohibition, medical cannabis tinctures were highly recommended for labor pains and severe morning sickness. The early 20th century brought widespread cannabis prohibition, impacting women and marginalized communities. Reefer madness, just as Marilyn has referred to, had fueled the stigma. So there's the stigma. And it led back to stricter laws and criminalization. And we had to fight back. The women fought back. We realized that many people are educated but had no knowledge about cannabis. So they were not totally convinced about anything we had to say. So the women now, let's talk about them. So I'm going to give you some history on the women that were involved in the cannabis movement. And if you look over to the left, that's Mary Jane Radbun. In the 1970s, she was better known as Brownie Mary. She did legal barriers by sharing her cannabis brownies to AIDS patients, advocating for its medicinal value. Pioneers like Alice O'Leary Randall, who we know and love, co-founded the first legal patient advocacy group for medical cannabis. More recently, Wanda James became the first Black woman to own a dispensary in the United States, pushing the envelope for social equality in the industry. Women, it's all about the women. Allow me to mention another one of our heroes and one of my many mentors from way back, Dr. Angela Davis, who is a political activist and scholar, for those of you that don't know who she is. Dr. Davis's stand is rooted, she's more rooted on the prison abolition and getting prisoner rights, and she argues that removing cannabis convictions and dismantling the punitive drug laws that we have are essential steps towards correcting human right abuses. Because folks, we the women are leading the change in cannabis. We are advocates, we are activists, and we are strong. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. Okay. I think I started smoking weed when I was maybe about 14 years old because I am a product of the late 60s and 70s. So it was common to do. You know, that's what we did as kids. That's how we entertained ourselves. And it was great. You know, we had a good time. And then I remember one day, one of my friends had her period and she had cramps and she smoked a joint. And she said to me, my cramps went away. And that was like the first experience that we had with, you know, the medicinal value of cannabis. So we all did it and it worked. It was good. Today, cannabis is recognized for its potential to help manage many conditions that cause chronic pain. Current research supports CBD's anti-inflammatory benefits without the psychoactive effects of THC. Cannabis-based therapies continue to be studied for conditions such as cancer-related symptoms, epilepsy, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about that, PTSD, and, you know, many more. The rise of the female consumer has forced the cannabis market to sit up and take notice. We are not just from the stoner culture. We are driving the demand for smarter, not necessarily stronger delivery systems. We continue to fight the society pressures of a negative stigma. Advocacy groups like the Women's Cannabis Project actively petition state government to add additional female health issues to medically qualify. Charlotte Figi, I want to talk about her a little bit. She was an American girl. She was a little girl who suffered from the horrors of Dravet syndrome. And if anybody knows what that is, it's really a horrible, horrible thing to have happen to your child or to anyone. But this little girl, she sparked a whole global movement. She was born in 2006, and she became the namesake and the inspiration changing public perception and legal status of CBD. And hence the Charlotte Web was born. It's not just a book. By age 5, her condition deteriorated to the point where she was enduring up to 300 grand mal seizures a day. And she was in a wheelchair. She was unable to speak. She was dependent on a feeding tube. And that was heartbreaking. In 2012, her mother began her research. Paige Fiji. Paige is still around too, and she's still out there advocating. She was Charlotte's mom. She connected with some medical cannabis growers in Colorado known as the Stanley Brothers, and there are 5 of them. The brothers developed a specific low THC, high CBD strain, previously known as hippie's dirtweed, and we all had a little bit of a taste of that. After taking the oil they had crafted, Charlotte went for a whole week without a seizure. Her seizure activity dropped down to just two to 3 per month, and she was able to talk, she was able to walk, she was able to ride her bike and eat without a feeding tube. So that was really epic. Unfortunately, Charlotte Fiji passed away on April 7, 2020, at the age of 13 after she had developed pneumonia. There was a lot of sickness going on in her family, and that was during COVID. And so, and she was vulnerable to disease. Although her life was short, she is fondly remembered as the spark that lit the CBD flame, and she gave hope to millions of people. And women. Okay, here is our story. That's what I really want to talk about now. Women cannabis nurses. Patients at a Time traces back to 1995, when the organization was officially incorporated as an educational nonprofit. The movement originally was sparked in the 70s when Robert Randall was arrested for growing cannabis. He won his court case using medical necessity to treat his glaucoma. He also gained legal access to government-grown cannabis. And who the heck knew we had government-grown cannabis back then? Following the trial, he and his wife, a woman, Alice O'Leary Randall, founded the Alliance for Cannabis Therapeutics, better known as ACT, to help others petition the federal government for cannabis access. Those efforts led to the creation of the Federal Compassionate IND program. However, in the words of the late, great Jim Morrison, for any of you that know who he was the lead singer of a band called The Doors, which was pretty popular in the early 70s. And he always had this one verse that I really, really loved. I would play it over and over again just to hear him shout, "You cannot petition the Lord with prayer." That program was shut down. So there's the connection. To new patients in 1992, grandfathering in only 15 existing patients. In 1995, Marilyn Pierce co-founded with Alice Patients Out of Time, a nonprofit dedicated to medical cannabis education. Their mission was to reverse the damage caused by prohibition and promote evidence-based education for clinicians and the general public. Okay, so I'm going to stop here because I want to tell you another story. And I'm going to tell you about a story of a woman that was very near and dear to all of us. This is the Cheryl Miller story. Cheryl was an MS patient who lived in my home state of New Jersey. And if you look on the slide that's up, if you look all the way to the right, you can see her laying in a wheelchair and her husband in the legislature out there with her. Cheryl became a prominent medical cannabis rights activist who risked arrest by committing civil disobedience in Washington, D.C. Her fearless protests took place in congressional offices and on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. She was pretty cool like that. She put a human face on the medical marijuana movement. Cheryl and her husband, Jim, had a tireless advocacy campaign. Largely immobile by the MS, she found that consuming cannabis eased her rigid muscle spasms and severe pain, so she ate the flower. Cheryl and Jim walked across the state of New Jersey. Now, we're not a big state, but they walked across the entire state with Cheryl in a wheelchair campaigning for patient rights. In 1998, Cheryl was arrested and charged with drug possession. You believe that? And for openly ingesting cannabis outside of the doors of Congress. Cheryl died from pneumonia and other MS-related complications on June 7, 2003, at the age of 56. Her husband and my dear friend Jim went on to lead the Cheryl Miller Project and continues to lobby for patients' rights. Cheryl Miller was a very strong-willed woman, and she will remain forever in our hearts. In 2006, the American Cannabis Nurses Association was founded by some visionary nurses, Marilyn again, Marilyn Matthew and Ed Glick. These founders recognized the need to help patients navigate safely the use of this medicine. An interim founders committee had formed in 2010 by nurses such as Brian Crum, our own Ken Wolski of Jersey, and Sharon Palmer, who met in 2010, and they set the stage. The ACNA was formally organized as a nonprofit in Oregon that same year. Many of us became members, and it was really exciting at that time. And I'm not saying that it's not still exciting, but things keep changing and things keep evolving. So we evolved into the year 2015, where a handful of very forward-thinking nurses wanted to collaborate space to study the endocannabinoid system. Those nurses gave birth, because that's what we do best, to the Cannabis Nurses Network, and began to share professional knowledge and advancements in cannabis medicine. And led by Heather Manus, this organization is thriving. The network has focused on shifting the legal and professional stigma surrounding plant medicine. CNN's foundation laid the groundwork for a much-needed change in healthcare. And as of 2023, the ANA formally recognized cannabis nursing as a specialty. So where are we today, besides right here? So as you can see, June 29th is on the calendar, and as you can see over to the left top-hand corner, there's a DEA badge. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, will commence an expedited administrative hearing on June 29th to evaluate cannabis in its entirety from a Schedule I to Schedule III under the Controlled Substance Act. This proceeding follows a late April 2026 final order from the Department of Justice, which moved state licensed medical marijuana and FDA products to Schedule III. That hearing will review to gather scientific evidence, public commentary, and expert testimony regarding whether all remaining forms of cannabis, to include recreational adult use, should be downscheduled. Now, just to let you know, when this meeting takes place, the people that are going there that are going to give testimony are prohibitionists. And right now, NORML and Safe Access and many of the other organizations, the big organizations out there, they are fighting to be heard, but it doesn't look like it's going that way. So stay tuned, my friends, and we'll see what happens. Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sue. History teaches us where we've been. Science helps us understand where we're going. Sue, you did a great job of recapping the history for us, and we really appreciate you doing that. Our next speaker bridges these two worlds through one of the most fascinating connections of all, the relationship between cannabis and the human brain. Today, we'll explore the remarkable relationship between the brain, the endocannabinoid system, and the future of neurological health. Please join me in welcoming Gloria Lynne Smith.
Thank you so much, Heather. I am so proud to be part of this group and this presentation. It's so important. All of the topics that have been discussed before me. Thank you so much, ladies, and we have so much more to go. I'm such a proud member of the CNN, and this is such an important discussion. Cannabis shares an extremely unique relationship with the brain and the neurologic system. One, it's only being started to be understood. This is the connection in cannabis that has always gripped me the tightest. Now, cannabis's role in our nervous system is remarkable. It's found to be both communicative and protective, which are unique qualities when it comes to something that affects the nervous system. The idea that cannabis could enhance the brain's already incredible neuroplasticity is one that has always fascinated me from my very beginnings with cannabis medicine, and one that I continue to explore and learn more about as time and research goes on. My name is Gloria, and I am proudly a freshly new graduated master's prepared nurse. on a lifelong quest to learn about our bodies, health, and disease. I always like to include my middle name, Lynne, with an E, because it's my mom's name and she is a nurse, and she's the reason that I became one. A little bit about me: I'm a board certified gerontologist, so I have a passion for those age 65 and up. I am an MSN nurse educator and a certified nurse case manager, among many other things. Now, kind of like Sue, I'm also a Jersey girl, and my connection to cannabis really started with my experience with MS patients. This is where I got to firsthand experience the remarkable work that cannabis does with the brain and the nervous system. Now, my story is a little bit different than most people. I was not a cannabis user. I like to jokingly tell the story that my sister is very close in age with me, and I fought because I was a DARE believer and she was a pot smoker, and we did not get along about that fact at all. And now I've become a cannabis nurse. But there was a time where there was an area where I needed to learn. And the New Jersey medical marijuana program was new, but thankfully I worked for a provider who was on the cutting edge of whatever was going on, and we figured it out together. We kind of stumbled through it, both not being cannabis users at the time, but we figured it out. I had a patient in her late 70s, which is very old for an MS patient if you know anything about MS. And she had been experiencing neuropathic pain that was resistant to pharmaceuticals, as it usually is. She had tried the gabapentins and the Lyricas and all the things, and nothing was working for her, and she was miserable. Now, like I said, the New Jersey medical marijuana program was new, and I wasn't a consumer at the time, but I did know that cannabis medicine could potentially work wonders for her nerve pain. We figured it out together, and she returned to update me on her experience with cannabis medicine. Well, it was so successful that it reduced her nerve pain to such a low dull that she was able to sleep through the night. And she proudly told me, which I will never forget, that she said, "I didn't know I deserved to feel this good." And her sad statement highlighted something which was a shortcoming in our healthcare system. Sometimes we treat disease like there's no other option but to suffer through that. And that's very true with most of our neurological disorders. Cannabis medicine has taught me that there are alternatives to suffering, and I'd like to teach some of them to you too in this short time we have together. So, we know our brain and our nervous system are complex, and some things we are just only starting to understand. There are new discoveries happening through research all the time. It takes a lot for us to keep up with it. But there's especially more research coming out when it comes to the fascinating relationship that cannabis has with our brain and our nervous system. We are learning that our bodies are designed to react to cannabinoids. Our bodies react to cannabinoids not only from outside the body, but they produce their own as well. Cannabinoids react with specific receptors designed just for them to signal the brain in real time. Now, being that our brain and nervous system are involved with just about every body action and reaction, this gives cannabis a far reach when it comes to effects. The fact that communication happens in real time is of particular interest to a lot of different people, but particularly athletes who are often incurring head injuries. Current studies are fascinating, and they include how cannabis can help with concussion therapy soon after the injury has taken place. But in order for us to do that, we have to understand what I'm probably preaching to the choir about in this room. We need to understand the endocannabinoid system. You'll hear about it today. I'm sure you've heard about it before, but it's important for us to continue to talk about it because in mainstream medicine, as we said before, it kind of remains a myth. It's important to discuss the endocannabinoid system in all its glory so that the lessons make their way to our providers, nurses, pharmacists, etc., because this is where the cannabis brain connection begins. CB1 and CB2 receptors send signaling molecules to communicate and adapt to changing conditions, all in the name of homeostasis. Regulation and managing dysregulation relies on that real-time communication to be successful. Now, neuroplasticity, if you haven't heard the word before, is what we call the brain's ability to adapt to changing conditions. Receptors help the lines of communication remain open for those transition of messages. Cannabinoids, both endogenous and exogenous, affect how those receptors signal. Now, because receptors are widespread throughout the body, cannabis can influence a multitude of receptor functions simultaneously, which can cause a cascade of events or stop a cascade of events. Now, pain perception is an easy way to think about the communication needs the body has in real time. The faster the message is sent, the more accurately the pain can be controlled. When we're talking about a cascade of events, we can think about inflammation because many events happen after one is triggered. Inflammation, therefore, takes lots of communication between multiple body systems, and cannabis is uniquely involved in influencing that communication found in both that cascade of inflammation and pain perception and signaling. Now, neuroprotection is how the brain obviously protects itself from damage, but also from loss of function. Therapies are aimed at preventing the cascade of events that cause cell injury or death, which is what causes disease. Cannabis medicine has been found to be neuroprotective, which is quite unique. And this is uniquely evidenced by the US patent that it has that exists from 1999, which I'd like to read a piece to you because I think it says it perfectly. So this patent reads, "Cannabinoids have been found to have antioxidant properties. This newfound property makes cannabinoids useful in the treatment and prophylaxis of a wide variety of oxidation-associated diseases, such as ischemic, age-related, inflammatory, and autoimmune diseases. The cannabinoids are found to have a particular application as neuroprotectants, for example, in limiting neurological damage following ischemic insults, such as stroke and trauma, or in the treatment of neurodegenerative diseases, such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and dementia." End quote. So, if the government found this interesting enough to patent it, maybe it deserves some time in research. So what do we actually need neuroprotection from exactly? Well, mostly we're talking about neuroinflammation. Inflammation isn't necessarily bad, but when we're talking about neuroinflammation, chronic inflammation damages neurons and causes all of these cascade of events, like oxidative stress. Now, we know through studies that CBD shows an antioxidant activity, very powerful, as well as reduces oxidative damage in neurons. Excitotoxicity is exactly what it sounds like. It's excessive neurotransmitter activity, which can cause dysfunction and death. We see this in stroke, traumatic brain injury, Alzheimer's, very classically Parkinson's disease, ALS, and epilepsy. Excess glutamate in this neuroinflammation is what drives excitotoxicity, and cannabis has been shown to inhibit glutamate response, so therefore reducing excitotoxicity. Age-related changes, such as decline in neurotransmitter function, cannabis is showing promise to be able to help with. So as mentioned before, cannabis medicine can directly affects dysfunction and loss in the brain and the nervous system. Neurodegenerative diseases that involve progressive neuron loss, like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, cannabis medicine is being studied not only with the reduction of neuroinflammation and all the other cool things I said already, but with symptom relief as well. And how does the effect work on how fast neuronal loss is occurring? Does it pause or slow down progression of these sad progressive diseases? So these things are currently being studied. But symptom management is something we can talk about in real time. It gives people suffering from these chronic illnesses new hope for quality of life. especially as we know with complaints of things like neurologic pain or pruritic or neurologic itching. What I find fascinating is looking at cannabis's role in brain injury, not only traumatic brain injury, but also stroke and concussion. Cannabis medicine is limiting damage and supporting recovery in real-world studies. I wanted to share a really interesting webinar that I recently attended. It was led by Train with Mary Jane and Mary Jane Athletics leading doctor and researcher. And I was absolutely fascinated by what they are learning, but I wasn't surprised by it. Now, Train with Mary Jane and Mary Jane Athletics, it's a healthcare-driven group in Canada where cannabis is federally legal, so it makes a little bit easier life for them. And they're looking at cannabis medicine as a real solution for today's athletes. It's a different world up there for them because of the legality. Players of large organizations can openly discuss their cannabis use without fear of repercussions, and that allows science to move forward, as opposed to here in the US where research gets pretty stuck pretty easily. But two studies that I thought were one study that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to share with everybody is their 2023 study that looked at adult soccer players. They had a group of 43 adult soccer players taking controlled headings that reproduced what they would take in a soccer game. And they talked about how they felt after. With all of the headers, there was significant impaired oculomotor function and complaints from the groups, but there was one group that was an open cannabis using group. And for that group, they showed that cannabis medicine had a significant role because the oculomotor function was decrease was significantly affected. They didn't have as much decrease as the non-cannabis users, and they didn't have as many complaints as the non-cannabis users after the headings either. So the results suggest that cannabis has a significant role in not only suppressing neuroinflammatory response, but that there's an enhancement of oculomotor function resiliency as well. So it acted as a protectant for these soccer players. And I found that research fascinating. They also did a 2024 research synthesis, which looked at a bunch of research that's already existing. And this research was partially funded by the NFL, by their pain management committee. It looked at current research that supports how cannabis medicine's role in athletics is under-researched, but very promising, highlighting studies like their own. They also noted that leagues such as the MLB, the NBA, and the NFL have removed cannabis medicine from their drug testing programs, even in the United States. So, just like my MS patient who had a really sad outlook at a wonderful gift that she was given, which I helped turn around, we need to remember that we all deserve to feel good. The cannabis-brain connection seeks balance to support just that. Homeostasis and feeling good. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I hope that you've learned something about the incredible connection that cannabis has to our brain. There's so much left for us to learn, and isn't that the exciting part of what we do and why we did it? The learning is happening right as we speak. Thank you, and if anyone wants references, I'm happy to share.
Thank you, Gloria. We've explored connections through history, advocacy, and neuroscience. Now we're invited to explore perhaps the deepest connection of all, our relationship with consciousness itself. Meg Little will be discussing cannabis, consciousness, and spiritual health. Healing isn't always physical. Sometimes the greatest transformation begins within. Meg invites us to consider how awareness, spirituality, and consciousness shape the healing journey. Please welcome Dr. Meg Little.
Thank you, Heather, for that kind introduction. If you are at all interested in following along with the slides, you can point your phone at that QR code as we go along here. I'd like to start with land recognition. I recognize, honor, and give thanks to the Native caretakers and residents of my region, which is upstate Minnesota, their ancestors and future generations. This land was called home by the Ojibwe people, before them the Dakota and Northern Cheyenne people, and other Native peoples from time immemorial. We all have our own unique stories around spiritual health, and it's rarely a straight line. Like many people, I inherited a spiritual tradition. But at age 12, my father gave me a copy of a book, The Religions of Man by Huston Smith. And that book introduced me to the possibility that wisdom could be found in many different traditions. It became a lifelong exploration of spirituality and what it means to live well. What I didn't know then was that Huston Smith would later become one of the most influential scholars exploring the relationship between consciousness, spirituality, and entheogens. And decades later, I find myself asking that same question that Smith did. How do experiences that alter consciousness influence spiritual growth and understanding? Hi, my name is Meg, and today I'll be talking with you about spirituality as a dimension of health, the cannabis catalyst, shifting the balance, shared ancestry, cautions and benefits, and implications for nursing and holistic care. So medicine used to include the soul. Then biomedical models stripped it out to focus purely on the machine of the body. And only in the last 50 years have we realized that spiritual health is a vital, immeasurable dimension of overall well-being. And nurses were really at the forefront of this. There are two terms that I'd like to make sure that we're on the same wavelength about. The first one is consciousness, which is our capacity for awareness. So if I'm in a coma, I've lost consciousness, I'm not aware. If I'm wide awake with you here, I have consciousness and I am aware. And sleep, something like sleep, is somewhere in between where we fluctuate our level of awareness. That's necessary for spirituality, for us to experience that. And spirituality we define as the way we seek and express meaning and purpose in our lives, and the way we experience connectedness to the moment, to ourselves, to other people, to nature, and to the significance and sacred things in our lives. So if spirituality is fundamentally about how we experience meaning and connectedness, what's the difference between knowing about spirituality and actually experiencing it? Well, to understand this, I'd like to share with you a famous thought experience from 1982 by a philosopher named Frank Jackson, and it's called Mary's Room. So imagine a brilliant scientist named Mary. She's a world-renowned scientist. She specializes in vision and perception of color, and she knows all there is to know about the science of how we see color. But there's a catch, right? Mary has spent her entire life confined to a black and white room. She's never seen actual color. She has only ever viewed the world through a black and white monitor. One day, Mary is finally released from her room, and she steps outside, looks down, and sees a vibrant red rose. So Jackson poses the crucial question, does Mary learn anything new? And the answer is yes. She didn't learn a new fact, but she learned what philosophers called qualia, which is the subjective lived experience of what it feels to see red. And this is a comparison I'll focus on today. Our everyday thinking is often like Mary inside the room, and a spiritual experience is Mary stepping outside. Now, let's take a look at how the brain actually steps outside the room. So as most of you know, within our consciousness, we have our executive network, our default network, and our salience network. So at the executive functioning level, we are looking at data and facts and logic and cause and effect, and that's Mary inside her room. The default network is our sense of a separate self, or our ego, and so that's like Mary's internal narrative as she's going through her daily life. And then the salience network, which is this kind of biological gear shift that opens us up to raw qualia of awe and unity, which is Mary stepping outside. So I've had my own experiences of this, as I'm sure you have as well. I took this picture a few years ago at the AHNA, American Holistic Nurses Association conference. I saw this rainbow during a break and a torrential downpour. My salience network switched into pay attention to that now. I was just overwhelmed by the sense of beauty and awe. So I pulled over and got out of my car using my executive network. I experienced this flood of connection to nature. And that's, again, bouncing back to my salience. Took a picture with it, which required some executive functioning. I did wonder for a second what people thought about this crazy woman on the side of the road staring at the sky, my default network. But I didn't care, again, default. And then I just stood there. I took in the body and the connection, the beauty and the connection with nature. Again, going back to salience. I texted the photo to a few friends, again, executive with a little bit of salience in there because it was all about not only my feeling of unity with nature, but also with friends and connections to them. And then I got in my car and drove home, back to my executive network. So that's how this process tends to work. So let's talk about how cannabis can be a catalyst for shifting the balance here. So cannabis turns down the volume in our brains. It quiets the executive functioning and softens the boundaries of our default mode, so we're less self-conscious as well. It puts the spotlight on our salience network, which it kind of turns in a lot of ways something that might be mundane into something awesome and deeply important, sacred and spiritual. And then the evidence for that is that brain imaging actually shows that altered connectivity across this triple network modulates how we process salience. There's not very much research behind this, but the research is pretty good. We have Johnstead, who found in 2020 that spiritual cannabis users tended to regard cannabis as an entheogen. And I'll remind us all that entheogen means generating the divine within, which I think is very apropos. And spiritual cannabis users had a different mode of engagement with cannabis than recreational users. Early Wine 2021 showed that higher doses of cannabis can produce experiences similar to those reported in psychedelic research, including increased insight, connectedness, and personal meaning, all characteristics of spirituality. And lastly, Hyde in 2022, in his study, and there were well over 1,000 people in this study, 66% of the participants reported spiritual benefit from cannabis versus only 5.5% who saw it as a hindrance. And his study really points to a similar importance in psychedelic research, that set and setting are really important. If people are using cannabis and their mindset is around, I'm using it for a spiritual purpose, they're more likely to have a spiritual outcome. And then again, setting, if you're in a place that's conducive to having that spiritual experience, that will, again, help you as well. So cannabis as a contemplative technology. Cannabis belongs to the same category as prayer, meditation, chanting, fasting, dance, and other spiritual practices. Some people totally don't agree with that, but for our purposes, it's just another tool to help us get into that space where we can have a spiritual experience. In fact, this little star down here, chicken or egg argument. Huston Smith, in his book, his latest book, really points out that we're not really quite sure if religious experience and spirituality is a phenomenon outside of ourselves or inside of ourselves, or something that was brought about by entheogenic experiences. So cannabis has been utilized as a mild entheogen across cultures for millennia. While specific beliefs differ, as you'll see here, the common thread is that it fosters connection, insight, transcendence, and mystical experiences. So the evidence from China and Tibet in 4000 BCE is not entirely established, but they think that Taoist visionary traditions used it. Then in India, it's very well documented. Middle East and Central Asia and Africa also very well established. And then in more modern times, Islamic Sufism has used it. The ever popular Rastafari use of it as a sacrament. And then in the 1960s, with the counterculture and consciousness movements, it became a little bit more mainstream in terms of a spiritual tool. So I want to spend a minute talking about cautions and benefits. I'll start with the cautions. So current evidence does not support cannabis producing a lasting spiritual growth. For the most part, it's an acute experience, but when it's well integrated, it can provide the groundwork for lasting growth. It does not increase spiritual maturity. It does not improve meaning in lifelong terms or enhance wisdom. It does not improve religious commitment. A lot of religions, it's not one of their beliefs. And then it doesn't produce enduring increases in well-being through spiritual mechanisms. Those haven't been established yet. And I think it's also important that we consider the potential misuse of cannabis when we're thinking about cautions. And next, I'd like to just point out this idea of spiritual bypassing. So spiritual bypassing is a relatively new phenomena, and it's a tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues or psychological wounds. And I think this is really important because it is used, admittedly, as a way to numb out and to avoid things that we really need to do, work that we really need to do. But at the same point, I think it's really important to point out that our culture really glorifies suffering in a lot of ways. But sometimes it makes a whole lot more sense to trek around the mountain than it is to climb over it. So I think that's something that you have to consider. We have to consider ourselves, but we also have to consider when working with clients and patients. In terms of benefits, cannabis commonly produces alterations in sensory perceptions, time perception, and emotional experiences, all characteristics of spiritual experiences. And it can help us in terms of interpreting spiritually meaningful events like mystical type experiences, that feeling of connectedness and unity, awe, and transcending ourselves. So implications for nursing. Our own ANA Code of Ethics states the nurse practices with compassion and respect for the inherent dignity, worth, and unique attributes of every person. Optimal nursing care enables the patient to live with as much physical, emotional, social, and religious or spiritual being as possible and reflects the patient's own values. Continuing on with this, I think it's important for us to recognize consciousness and spirituality as legitimate dimensions of care. I've heard so many people say that spirituality has no place in medicine. We're all about the mechanics of the body. And we know it's evidence-based now that that's just simply not accurate. It's important for us to address meaning, purpose, and connection with our clients and patients so that we know where their minds are at, where their spirits are at, and so that we can assist them with their healing in those areas. Assessment is key. There are some assessments out there for spiritual health that can be very helpful tools. Facilitating integration of spiritual experiences, I think, is really important. This is what makes those spiritual experiences stick, right? If someone has this experience during use of cannabis that feels transcendent, it's important for them to sit down with somebody else, or you can do some of it on your own, but it's helpful to sit down with someone else and process that. And that kind of solidifies that into our memory and helps us use it going forward in our lives as a valuable tool. It's important for us to practice cultural humility and decenter our own beliefs and experiences. This is all about the patients and how they see the world and what their sense of meaning and purpose are and their practices of spirituality. It's not about us and what we believe. It's important to create safe, non-judgmental conversations. You've heard a lot today about stigma. It's important to address that head on and do our own work in terms of being able to be supportive of others. It's also important for us to be able to differentiate spiritual experiences from pathology, because often when people are having a negative spiritual experience, sometimes it can look like symptoms of mental illness. So it's really important for us to be able to distinguish between the two. And then it's super important for us to be evidence-based in our practice, including harm reduction when that's appropriate. So lastly, I'd like to just introduce you, if you don't already know about this study, on connectedness and how it matters. And Christakis and Fowler did this work starting in 2008. In this particular one, they took the Framingham Heart Study data from 1996 to 2000, so it's over 1,000 people, which gives it a lot of statistical power. But Framingham is one community where they studied heart disease, but they collected a lot of data that was useful in other ways and used in this study. And they concluded that relationships form networks. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But they were looking at happy and unhappy people, and both of them cluster together. So if you look at that weird looking map, the blue are the unhappy people, and the bright green, the green kind of chartreuse color are the happiest people. The other green is in the middle. But as you can see, the happy and in between people really cluster together, and they're closer to the center of the community and of the networks. And then the blue people, the people who are unhappy or sad, tend to be more isolated and tend to be outside the center, kind of towards the edges of a network. And so it's really important for us to remember that birds of a feather flock together, basically, right? So if connection, in my mind, if connection is central to happiness and a myriad of other topics, they did this for smoking cessation, divorce, gratitude, a variety of different topics. I guess my thesis is that perhaps it's also central to spirituality, that if we are interested in doing this work, that it's important for us to find community and network to be able to sustain ourselves and to sustain our clients and patients. I think it also applies to us as a professional community. This wonderful community that Heather has created, where we can come together and talk about topics that are really important to us and learn from each other, I think is just a great gift, and something that I hope that we'll be able to continue. So we spend much of our time helping people live longer. Perhaps spiritual health reminds us that our work is also about helping people live more deeply. Thank you.
Oh, just beautiful. Thank you, Meg. As we've heard today, connection shows up in many forms: through legacy, through advocacy, through history, science, and through consciousness. Our final speaker brings all of these ideas together through compassionate nursing practice. Dr. Love Hawkins will be speaking about rooted in compassion, guided by science, and compassion and science are often viewed as separate paths. Today's final speaker reminds us that the most meaningful healthcare happens when they walk together. Please welcome Dr. Love Hawkins.
Thank you. All right, so first, I want to say I am so elated to hear how much we're all like on the same wavelength, because we're underlining a lot of the same things. So there's unity in that. However, more so, you all almost could say that me and Heather got together and shared our notes, and we said we're going to say the exact same thing. But I promise you that we did not. It's just just being in that same wavelength, experiencing those same emotions about what all is going on in the world. Second, I want to share that I am retired Air Force. And so for many years, even from a child, like I never, ever, ever touched the plant. However, as a child, learning that this plant existed and that people were going to jail for it. And then as a child, there was this level of confusion about something growing freely out in nature being illegal. And the threat of going to jail for engaging with a plant that naturally grows in nature. So as a child, that did not compute. It didn't make sense to me. So I didn't judge the people that were taking cannabis. I just never engaged with it because I didn't want to go to jail. So yeah, I like this thing called freedom, to do what you want to do. So once I got out of the Air Force, things came into my peer view that had to do about medical cannabis. I'm like, what is this? And so that's what intrigued me to get me onto this journey. So I want to also take a moment to express our deep, deep gratitude for you all taking time out of your schedules to join us for our Connected Speaker Series. My name is Love, and I've been a nurse for over 20 years now, and I hold board certifications as a women's health nurse practitioner, nurse midwife, and a nurse coach. And I also hold 2 medical cannabis certifications. And I enjoy educating and participating in research initiatives and advocating for my clients, as well as various public health policies. All right, so now I'd like to share a little something with you that I found quite interesting. Several years ago, I was in a meeting sitting next to a woman who lowered her voice before asking me a question. And it wasn't because she was discussing anything illegal. It wasn't because she was ashamed of what she had done, but she was afraid of being judged. She had chronic pain. She wasn't sleeping. So she was exhausted from trying treatment after treatment. And someone finally came along and suggested to her that maybe cannabis might help. Yet before she even asked her question, she looks around the room and she leans in and whispers, "Can I ask you something about cannabis?" And I remember thinking how strange that was. A grown woman, very intelligent, educated, but yet desperate for answers. And she felt she needed this permission to simply ask a question. Now, this real barrier. Oh man, over the years, I've heard the same hesitation from veterans, mothers, grandparents, healthcare professionals, and people from every single walk of life. Sometimes the greatest barrier is fear. Fear of judgment, fear of stigma, fear of asking the wrong question. And that very realization is the thing that assisted me in changing the way that I approach my work. So, what's the big idea? All of this got me to thinking, what if one of the most powerful forms of healing isn't a medication? It isn't a supplement or some type of treatment. And so what if it's simply creating a space where people feel safe enough to learn? Because education changes fear, and compassion creates the conditions where learning can happen. Now, you've all heard about this endocannabinoid system, and that's a mouthful, and so we tend to just call it the ECS. But most people know about this nervous system in our bodies, the digestive system, the cardiovascular system, all the systems that many of us learned in nursing school. Now, I've been in this cannabis education space for about 5 years or so. And every time I ask someone, have they ever heard of the endocannabinoid system? They say no. And that even goes for the majority of the medical professionals that I engage with as well. The ECS exists within all of us, every single one of us. And its job is simple, yet it's very profound. And as Nurse Heather said earlier, like maintaining that balance throughout the body, that balance in sleep, balance in the mood, balance in pain perception, balance in immune function, memory, appetite. Scientists call this homeostasis. I often tell people to imagine our body's master balancing system, constantly working behind the scenes to help us adapt to stress, help us balance pain perception, balance in immune function, memory, appetite. I often tell people to imagine our body's system working hard behind the scenes to help us adapt to that stress, maintain equilibrium. And when it gets out of balance, which is likely the case with the majority of us throughout the world, I think, there are many ways to help restore it. But if we don't even know it exists, how can we even begin to go in that direction? And the remarkable thing is that most healthcare providers receive little to no education about this system during any formal training. Even though it was discovered more than 30 years ago, so I think that's quite long enough for it to have made it to our textbooks by the time that I went to nursing school. So, and if we don't understand that system, how can we have informed conversations about the therapies that interact with it, period? So, as a nurse coach, educator, and advocate, I've discovered that something that's really important. People are seeking relief. They are seeking hope, sleep, comfort, quality of life. I mean, like, who does not want quality of life? And so the cannabis conversation is just often the doorway. And so what people truly need is someone who's willing to listen, someone to say, just tell me your story. Tell me what you've tried. Tell me what most matters to you. So healing doesn't begin when we hand someone information. We've all gotten those pamphlets. Here you go, just read this, read that. Healing begins when people absolutely feel heard. So I listen before advising, and I allow curiosity to come before drawing any conclusions. So now, while compassion is required, that alone isn't enough. We also need the science. We need continued research. We need education. We need advocacy. All right. And so throughout my work, I've had the privilege of participating in research initiatives, educating communities about the ECS, and collaborating with organizations that are committed to safe access and evidence-informed cannabis education, such as what we experience here with the Cannabis Nurses Network. And so because every person deserves accurate information, not fear, not myths, not stigma, information. And when science and compassion work together, people are empowered to make decisions that align with their own values, goals, and health needs. So if you haven't already, I invite you to get involved. Watch what can happen, or it can take you. I often think back to that woman who whispered her question to me. And so what she needed wasn't permission to take cannabis. What she needed was permission to ask, permission to learn, permission to participate, in a conversation about her very own health. And so today, my work is rooted in a simple belief. People deserve both compassion and science. They deserve to be heard before being educated and or advised. And they deserve support as they navigate their own path towards their well-being. Because healing begins when we create spaces where questions are welcomed, learning is encouraged, and people feel empowered to make informed decisions. They have a right to that. We all have a right to that. To making decisions that are rooted in compassion and guided by science. So I invite you to adopt whatever things that we've discussed today into your approach in whatever the context is that you're engaging with others. Become a part of this movement that's rooted in both heart and science, heart and evidence. And so together we can indeed make a difference. So again, I deeply, deeply appreciate your presence and your attention here today. It is not taken lightly. And I invite you to reach out should you desire to take this conversation any further. Otherwise, you'd be on the lookout for a much more in-depth presentation on this subject from myself and the other members of our panel today as well. Thank you very much.
What an incredible journey we've shared together. Today we discovered that connection is more than the theme of this event. It's the foundation of healing itself. Connection transforms fear into courage, knowledge into wisdom, patients into partners, and communities into movements. Each speaker reminded us that our voices matter, our stories matter, and relationships we build have the power to change lives. Thank you to each of our extraordinary speakers for your courage, authenticity, and generosity. And thank you to everyone joining us today. Your presence is part of this connection also. I hope you leave feeling inspired, more hopeful, and more connected than you were before you arrived. Because every story has the power to bring us closer together. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you so very much for being here.
Healing lived inside medicine, but every patient left a fingerprint upon this heart of mine. Story after story, a lesson gently grows. The greatest gift we ever gave is simply letting someone know they're not alone. When hope feels broken, when fear won't let go, there's one quiet truth that every heart should know. Connection, that's where healing starts. One conversation, one open heart, one hand reaching through the darkest night. Love finds a way. Connection, more than words we say. Alive inside us all. Alive inside us all. Some found courage, some found their voice, some found science, some found choice, some found history, others found grace, some simply found a safe place to breathe again. We don't need perfection, we don't need to know it all. Sometimes healing begins when someone answers the call. That's where healing starts. One conversation, one open heart, one hand reaching through the darkest night. Love finds a way. Oh, connection, more than words we say. It's the bridge that shows the way. Changing lives one soul at a time. The power of connection alive inside us all. We're connected to the earth beneath our feet. Connected to every soul we meet. Connected to hope we cannot see. Connected to who we're meant to be. Connection, the medicine we share. Connected, a quiet presence. Connected, simply being there. Every story, every life we touch reminds us love can heal so much. Connection, it echoes through time, heart to heart, life to life. And when they ask what legacy we'll leave, we'll smile and say, we help the world feel love. Connection, connection. Healing begins when people feel connected.